Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parvajakacharya Astar Sata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Gaur Premananda. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. Glories to Srila Prabhupada. Which chapter is it? 5. Okay. 2:5:25. Two, 5, 25. Okay, there it is. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 5, The Cause of All Causes, Text 25. Tamasad api bhutader vikorvanat abun nabaha tasya matra guna shabdo lingam yad drishyayo tamasarapi bhutader vikorvanat abunnabaha tasya matra guna shabdo lingam yadrastra drishyayo tamasarapi bhutader vikorvanat abunnabaha tasya matra guna shabdo lingam yadrastra drishyayo tamasarapi bhutader vikorvanat abunnabaha tasya matra guna shabdo lingam yadrastra drishyayo tamasarapi bhutader vikorvanat abunnabaha tasya matra guna shabdo tamasarapi bhutader Gurvana Vishwanaha Vacham Yikam Yajasa Drishyayaho Amasarapi Bhutadir Gurvana Bunchama Tasyamatra Gana Shabdo Drishyayo Tamasarapi Bhutadir Gurvana Bunchama Tasya Matra Guna Shabdo Lingam Yad Astrajisrayo. Vaishnavis Avasarapi Bhuta there Sarapi Bhuta there. Sabdo Yisrael Tamasad from the darkness of false ego. Api, certainly. Bhuta ade, of the material elements. Vikurvanat, because of transformation. Abut, generated. Nabaha, the sky. Tasya, its. Matra, subtle form. Gunaha, quality. Shabdaha, sound. Lingam, characteristics. Yet, as its. Drastri, the seer. Drishyayaho, of what is seen. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Translation. From the darkness of false ego, the first of the five elements, namely the sky, is generated. Its subtle form is the quality of sound, exactly as the seer is in relationship with the seen. Purport. The five elements, namely sky, air, fire, water, and earth, are all but different qualities of the darkness of false ego. This means that the false ego, in the sum total form of Mahat Tattva, is generated from the marginal potency of the Lord. And due to this false ego of lording it over the material creation, ingredients are generated by the false enjoyment of the living being, for the false enjoyment of the living being. The living being is practically the dominating factor over the material elements as the enjoyer, though the background is the Supreme Lord. Factually, save and except the Lord, no one can be called the enjoyer, but the living entity falsely desires to become the enjoyer. This is the origin of false ego. When the bewildered living being desired this, the shadow elements are generated by the will of the Lord, and the living entities are allowed to run after them as after a phantasmagoria. It is said that first the tanmatra sound is created, and then the sky. And in this verse, it is confirmed that actually it is so. But sound is the subtle form of sky, and the distinction is like that between the seer and the seen. The sound is the representation of the actual object, as the sound produced speaking of the object. The sound is the representation of the actual object, as the sound produced speaking of the object gives an idea of the description of the object. Therefore, sound is the subtle characteristic of the object. Similarly, sound representation of the Lord in terms of his characteristics is the complete form of the Lord, as was seen by Vasudeva and Maharaj Dasarat, the fathers of the Lord Krishna and Lord Ram. The sound representation of the Lord is non-different from the Lord himself, because the Lord and his representation in sound are absolute knowledge. Lord Chaitanya has instructed us that in the holy name of the Lord, a sound representation of the Lord, all the potencies of the Lord are invested. Thus, one can immediately enjoy the association of the Lord by the pure vibration of the sound representation of his holy name, and the concept of the Lord is immediately manifested before the pure devotee. A pure devotee, therefore, is not aloof from the Lord, even for a moment. The holy name of the Lord, as recommended in the Shastras, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, may therefore be constantly chanted by the devotee aspiring to be constantly in touch with the Supreme Lord. One who is thus able to associate with the Lord is sure to be delivered from the darkness of the created world, which is a product of false ego. Tamasi ma jyotirgama. Om Jnana Timrandasya Garanjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So, it's said that just as death may come at any moment, the order to give Bhagavatam class may come at any moment. And one has to be prepared for that. So, I was given that opportunity this morning. It's interesting, Srila Prabhupada mentions in the purport that the different objects that we perceive are made up of these different elements: earth, water, fire, air, ether, or sky. And he calls them shadow elements, because in the spiritual world, everything is Sat Chit Ananda Vigraha. Everything is made of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. Everything is we chant, in the morning, during the greeting of the deities, the different verses from the Brahma Samhita, that describe, the spiritual world. So, the elements in this world are, he says, shadow elements. And he says, for the conditioned souls, it's like chasing after a phantasmagoria. And what is a phantasmagoria? It means some kind of hallucinatory image, that might appear before someone, if they're lost in a forest or shipwrecked in an ocean, they, after some time, they begin to hallucinate, and they see all kinds of things, that are sometimes very frightening, sometimes very attractive, but when they go after them, they find they're insubstantial. Sometimes these things can happen. So this world is like a phantasmagoria. It's all generated from false ego. And what is the real ego, the real consciousness of the self? That is Jivara Swarupa Hoy Krishnara Nityadas. Lord Chaitanya stated that. The constitutional position of the living entity is to be the eternal servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, that is the real ego. When the soul, the individual soul, turns away from Krishna, then that false ego is there. One is no longer thinking, I am the eternal servant of the Supreme Lord Krishna. Whether, maybe in the spiritual world in Goloka Vrindavan, they aren't thinking Supreme Lord, maybe they're thinking Krishna. But they're always in a mood of service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami gives an explanation how even Balaram, even the different plenary expansions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they don't feel, okay, now I'm an independent personality of Godhead. Even though it said these plenary expansions like Lord Balaram are equal in power to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they still have a mood of service to the original Personality of Godhead, even though they may be so powerful, just as powerful, it's said of Krishna. Between Krishna and Balaram, sometimes it's said the only difference is one is blackish color of the rain cloud, and the other is white. They dress differently, they have a different complexion. But no, Balaram he always sees himself as the servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Same Krishnadas Kaviraj said the same thing with Srimati Radharani. All of these great personalities, they consider themselves servants of the Supreme Lord. They're interested in His pleasure, not their own pleasure. But in the Chaitanya Charitamrita it says, but the mystery of devotional service is that when the eternal servants of the Lord are in that mood of serving, giving everything to Krishna, wanting only His pleasure, they experience themselves, even though they don't want it, they don't desire it, they experience themselves the highest kind of pleasure, even greater in a sense than that felt by the Lord Himself. So much so that Lord Chaitanya, Krishna sometimes desires to appear in the position of His devotee or worshipper, so He can Himself experience that ecstasy of serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It's one of the purposes of His manifestation. But the point is that when Krishna Bahir Mukha Hana Bhogavanchakare Nikatashta Mayatari Japati Atare, when the soul turns away from Krishna and tries to become an independent, fully independent enjoyer, then Maya is there to capture the consciousness of that soul. And through acting through his energy, his different energies, Krishna ultimately manifests another world for that soul to engage in. And that's Krishna's mercy as well. It's like creating a phantasmagoria. And by false ego, the living entity identifies with material body because in each living entity has its own eternal spiritual form, its swarupa. But that can only be used for pure devotional service. So if the souls coming to this world are going to be able to function, they have to have another kind of body, not a body of eternity, knowledge, and bliss, but a body composed of different elements. And they have to have, and those elements are also displayed for them to interact with and try to enjoy, control, things like that. But ultimately it's an illusion, not in the sense that it's not real. It's real, it exists, the material energy exists. But everything that we try to do in it is temporary, mixed with different kinds of unpleasant things. Birth, death, old age, and disease, janma, mrityu, jara, vyadhi, dukkha, dosh, anudarshanam. And there's the adi atmic miseries, the adi bhautic miseries, the adi daivic miseries, adi atmic miseries are the ones that come from our own body, mind. Then adibautic miseries, the miseries that are caused by other living entities, whether they're mosquitoes or rats or poisonous snakes or other humans that you don't like and you have to associate with them. The French existentialist philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, he said, hell is other people. So that's not among the devotees. So how is all that manifested? It's a combination of elements. And we're learning in this chapter how these elements, these different ingredients of the cosmic manifestation are manifested. There are, what are the ingredients of this material creation? There are the Pancha Mahabhutas, that's the 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, ether. Srila Prabhupada sometimes says, sometimes sky. And there are also the 5 sense objects, subtle sense objects: taste, smell, sound, touch, hearing, form. And then there are the different senses that interact with these elements. The 5 knowledge acquiring senses, the 5 working senses. That's kind of interesting. I always liked that idea, because normally in the Western world, when we talk about senses, we only think of the Gyanendriyas, the 5, the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue for tasting, skin for touch. We only think of those kinds of things. But according to the Sankhya philosophy of the Bhagavatam, as presented by Lord Kapila, the working senses are also senses. The arms for doing different things, the legs for moving around, the voice for speaking, the organs of generation, reproduction, and excretion. Those are also considered to be senses. And they're all grouped around the mind. And the mind is connected with the intelligence. Intelligence is connected with the false ego. And false ego is what connects the eternal conscious self, the jiva, with this phantasmagoria that's generated by these, I think, what is it, about 23 other elements that manifest this whole phantasmagoria of material existence. But it all starts with false ego, which generates these different elements, starting with the most subtle one. So, as explained here, there's sound, which is connected with ether or sky, as Srila Prabhupada calls it here, space. So, and then from that, the grosser elements come. And how do you get out of the phantasmagoria? Well, Krishna gives the method for doing that. Because the souls in the material world, they've got a choice to make. They can become they can keep chasing after the phantasmagoria, in the vain hope of becoming the controllers and the enjoyers. Or they can return to the position of being the eternal servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the way they do that is by giving attention to the transcendental sound of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, His holy names. Harinama, Harinama, Harinama Kevalam, Kalo Nasteva, 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 Gatiranyata. So by hearing that transcendental sound vibration, which is non-different from the Supreme Lord, it's full of all of His vast spiritual energies and potencies, that has the ability to cure us of our attachment to the false material world. It's like an alarm clock that wakes us up. We may be sleeping, dreaming so many things. In our dream, we may be doing this, we may be doing that. It may be very wonderful scenery, and of course it also may be a nightmare. That can also happen. Like many people think we're going through a very nightmarish sequence of events out in the world of politics and everything. So, but you wake up from it, and then you understand, yes, it's time for me to go to the temple and attend the Bhagavatam class. So, the transcendental sound vibration comes from the spiritual world. That's Krishna providing spiritual sense objects, not shadow elements, but the real elements kind of intrudes into the phantasmagoria, the dream world, the alternative world, the material world, whatever name, virtual reality system, whatever we want to call it. It's like that. So, it operates in such a way that it begins to dissolve things. Like it's being explained here, the first element that comes from the false ego is sound, which is connected with ether, and everything generates from that. So the holy name is striking right at the root of the whole phantasmagoria. There's so much sound vibration going on in the world. The sound vibrations of politics, the sound vibration of music, the sound vibration of this and that. So many kinds of material sound vibration are there. So if we're attracted to that kind of sound vibration and even generate it ourselves, that's not helping us, it's not helping anybody else. So we should give attention to the transcendental sound vibration of the Lord's holy name. And if we're going to generate sound, that's the kind of sound we should generate. That'll be good for us, good for everyone else. Hare Krishna. We can go. Thank you.
Steph can come at any time in order to get class.